So now let's see another disease that have been around and is still posing very big challenges to the world, tuberculosis. Again, if you are not very familiar with this disease, tuberculosis is caused by a bacterium, okay? Bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Usually, it will affect your lungs. It will give you pulmonary tuberculosis or pulmonary TB. But the bacteria can actually affect any other parts of your body. It can affect any part of your body, and then it will be extrapulmonary tuberculosis. But not everyone, not every person who gets infected with tuberculosis, with the bacteria, will become sick. And these persons will be with latent tuberculosis infection. But if they are not treated properly, they can develop the disease, and those who develop disease, if not treated properly, it could be fatal. A few signs and symptoms for tuberculosis. Usually tuberculosis in the lungs may cause you to cough at least 3 weeks or longer. You have experienced pain in the chest. You may cough blood or sputum. And some other symptoms that the patients may have: weakness, fatigue. They will lose a lot of weight loss. They will not have appetite. They will experience chills or fevers or sweats at night. The symptoms of tuberculosis disease in other parts of the body will depend on the affected area. Okay, so now again, WHO publishes the Global Tuberculosis Report every year. And this is some highlights from the latest report in 2015. They have been publishing this since 1997, and including the main findings. Okay. So in the latest report, the absolute number of incident cases, again, of new cases, new people diagnosed, is falling, but it's falling slowly. Okay, it's 1.5 per year since the year 2000. And there's an estimate of nearly 10 million, 9.6 million people newly reported in the year 2014. More than half of them are in the Asian region, 58% of them, and 28% of them in the African region, and much less in the other regions. Something important here, 12% of the cases of tuberculosis are HIV positive. 1.2 million new HIV positive tuberculosis cases. And 3/4 of these cases are in the African region. As to prevalence, we have an estimated 13 million prevalent cases, 13 million people having the disease. Okay? And the prevalence rate by the end of 2015 was 42% lower than in 1990, which is something encouraging. Regarding mortality, estimated 1.5 million deaths, people dying from tuberculosis, okay? And from these, nearly 400,000 of them were among people with HIV, okay? So now you are starting to think the importance of the link between tuberculosis and HIV. The tuberculosis mortality rate in 2015 was lower than in 1990, 47% lower. But now tuberculosis is ranking along HIV as a leading cause of death worldwide. This is a figure taken also from the report from the WHO. And to your right, to your left, here you have the countries with the highest absolute numbers. Okay, so this is measuring only the number of cases, absolute numbers. In terms of absolute numbers, the top 10 countries are these ones. Of course, this is a not very appealing top 10 list. From this list, more than half of the absolute numbers are there in these 5 countries: India, Indonesia, China, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Altogether are reporting 54% of the total global. But these are absolute numbers. And the graph to your right takes a look at the number of new tuberculosis cases, but relative to the population size of the country, or in other words, the incidence rate. Okay? And if we take in account the population size, then Lesotho is the worst affected. If we check the global incidence rate, global, in all the countries, in average, they have 133 cases per 100,000 people. In Lesotho, in South Africa, we are seeing more than 800 cases per 100,000 population. So it's very, very much higher than the global. So we see that the number of new tuberculosis cases relative to the population, or in other words, the incidence rate, varies widely among different countries. Here you can see, this is a map showing you different estimated new tuberculosis cases per 100,000 people. Okay, so the darker the color, the highest the incidence. Now you can see how it's concentrated in some part of the world. The lowest rates, the very, very light color, the lowest rates are found mainly in high-income countries, okay? Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand. If you see here, this is a small graph that I put here. This is showing you the rate per 100,000 population, but this is grouped by the regions. Okay, you have here the region of the Americas, Europe, and this is Southeast Asian region and the African region. This is versus cases per year by thousands. So you see here how the region of the Americas, has the lowest burden of tuberculosis on average. If we see globally, the incidence rate was relatively stable from 1990. This 1990 to 2015. The incidence rate was relatively stable, and then around the year 2000, from the year 2000, it started to fall. Okay. And this is for prevalence, and this is for mortality. Okay. The dotted line is actually showing you what was the goal with the MDGs. Okay. If we see now, this one was the global view, but we see now for the different regions, we see how they have been doing in terms of incidence rate. This is from the year 1990 to 2015. You can see here how it really had a more steep fall in the Americas compared to Africa, for instance. So the MDGs target were met in all the 6 WHO regions. They halved, they stopped, and they reduced, they start decreasing the incidence. This is the estimated prevalence of tuberculosis. This is from 1990 to 2015 for all the regions. You have here Africa, the Americas, Eastern Mediterranean, Europe, Southeast Asia, and Western Pacific. And these horizontal lines will represent the target goal for the MDGs. Okay? This is a 50% reduction in the prevalence rate by the year 2015 compared to what they had in the year 2000. Okay? So actually, before the 2015, some regions had already achieved their goals. And for the others, they are still not reaching. Others are very close. This is the estimated HIV prevalence in new and relapsed tuberculosis cases. Again, we can see how disproportionate it's affecting to different countries in the world. The darkest colors showing you highest prevalence, also concentrated in certain parts of the world. And as I was earlier mentioning about tuberculosis and HIV, tuberculosis now ranks alongside HIV as leading cause of death from an infectious disease. If you see here, this is the top causes of death worldwide. This is a much nicer figure from the very first one that I show you. You have here ischemic heart disease, strokes, lower respiratory infections, and here you have tuberculosis. Okay? This is worldwide, top causes of death. And here you have HIV and AIDS. But now you have cases of tuberculosis that are also HIV positive. So there's an estimated 1.5 million tuberculosis deaths in the year 2014. 1.1 were non-HIV positive, so HIV negative patients. But 390,000 of them were HIV positive, this figure. Okay? And the thing is that HIV positive patients dying for tuberculosis under the international coding, they will be coded as a cause of death as HIV. Okay? So there is a group there that are actually also having tuberculosis, and maybe they are not being counted for tuberculosis numbers. So globally, in 2014, there were in average 16 tuberculosis deaths per 100,000 population. This is among HIV negative patients. Okay. But maybe approximately 80% of the deaths among HIV negative people is occurring in African region and Southeast regions. So there is a considerable variation. There is a very dramatic variation between or among countries.